Hello, I am Quinny. Welcome back, guys. We're here for episode 3. Hopefully you can tell for the first 2 episodes you've watched so far, me and all the guys had an absolute blast talking football and going through the MLS and just giving our 2 cents on what we think's coming with the season ahead. This episode is no different. We're going through the exact same stuff. 5 more teams for us to go through. This is episode 3. Don't forget there's going to be 5 all in. All the links are down below for all the guests. You can go find them on Twitter. Make sure you give them a follow. Like, subscribe, share, retweet, all that good stuff, guys. Stay out of trouble and let's get stuck into this one. So the next team we move on to, right, is Colorado Rapids, which is your team, Richard, right? Now, I've not told you this until we've hit record, right? But if I can be honest with you, right, I have always hated the Rapids, right? I've never been excited by them ever. When you signed Tim Howard, I was just like, what's he doing? Why is he going to the Rapids? He should be going to a big team, That was. Yep. But he did well when he did well right after Howard came in. I think he's got to an MLS Cup final. I don't think he's won it. Did you maybe get to 2 finals or something like that? But he's had a nice little purple patch over the last kind of couple of years, doing well, getting to finals and stuff like that. And the thing that really changed my opinion on Colorado over the last year is guys like Cole Bassett, Sam Vines. They've got a real vibrant academy feel coming through the club now. So my perception of the club has changed, I must admit, over the last year. But prior to that, I was just never excited by Colorado. I just never, I don't know. I never seen any big DPs going there. I never seen any exciting results, And from an outsider, even though, for me, I was always trying to, really feel the league out and everything, Colorado was just never a team I could ever get behind until recently. The season we've got coming up should be a really big year for you. Your average points per game was amazing last year, even though he's never got that many fixtures completed. And if those points per game runs again this year, you will do really, really well. I've got a lot of faith in you.
That's good. It's definitely that there's dark ages in there. Can't blame you. Like the mid 2000s Rapids, basically after the MLS Cup, that game-winning goal, the guy who scored it, I forgot his name. He lunges for the ball. He tears his ACL on the shot.
Oh wow!
So ever since then, it's been downhill. But things are looking up recently. They've always had a solid youth system. So the names like you mentioned there, right? Right now we've got Vines, Bassett, Shinyashiki, Sebastian Anderson. There's even Lewis. There's a couple others that there's tons of Courtney Ford, right? Tons of homegrowns in Colorado, massive. There's a massive soccer culture in Colorado, so in that sense, I would encourage you to visit. Maybe don't go to a game directly, go hiking first. But and so and like we said, in terms of one of the teams bringing back most of their talents, this is one of them as well. Where I think the starting 11 is almost unchanged from last year. They had a bunch of coronavirus-related issues. They missed a bunch of games.
Yeah.
So points per game was solid, but the game part wasn't there necessarily. This is again one if the Rapids have the year, this is it since 2010. They've kind of adopted a nicer playing style. People around the league are taking notice that in the past it was Dallas, perhaps maybe a little bit from other teams like Philadelphia who have this really, really good academy system, and they bring up their talent, and I think the Rapids are kind of entering that tier. Bassett being the best example, I think. And then, so that's going to be good stuff to look out for. And so,
one of the signings he's made recently, Michael Barrios coming in from Dallas.
Oh yeah.
Along with I don't know the boy Toure you've brought in from the Red Bulls, but I can also see Michael Edwards, an American, getting brought in from Wolfsburg. But you're quite right. There's no outgoings. There's been some nice little add-on additions. Pad the team out a bit more, add a bit of depth into the roster. So the name that kind of jumps out to me there when I was kind of glancing through the squad, because of the international break we've got now, is Kellen Acosta.
Oh yeah.
So he's with the national team now. He's actually listed on this website I'm on as a defender, but by all accounts he's a midfielder.
Yep.
So Kellen Acosta, Sam Vines, Cole Bassett are the kind of guys I recognise from SO5 and doing well last year. Shinya Jike, or if I can say that properly, was also a big draft pick. He did really well last year, and I think being Brazilian, you're always going to get some attention from it from SoRare managers because the expectation is that South Americans will outperform, the average player, because you'd expect them to have a bit more technical nous and whatever. But Diego Rubio is an odd one as well because he's been around the league for a while. He's quite capable at this level, but he's definitely not absolutely prolific. But they've got a lot of pieces around there that are all capable of contributing double figures, goals and assists individually, without any of them maybe being a massive standout contributor.
Yeah, I think the best shot at that is, Bassett, Acosta, kind of the guys you mentioned, like the central three, basically Bassett, Acosta, and Jack Price too. He kind of sits back, but he takes a lot of set pieces, and so in terms of like, getting some assists from there, I think he has a pretty decent floor points wise. But yeah, once you get to like the outside positions and especially forward, gets pretty deep. Like you mentioned Rubio, Shinyashiki, and then on the outsides you have, I'm looking at the depth chart here, but like Lewis, Benezet, Namli, Barrios, Shinyashiki can play out wide. You got a young guy, Brian Galvin. So those outside spots might see, probably not something you can rely on like week in, week out, given all the rotation that might happen there.
Yep.
But yeah, the central three should definitely benefit there.
Do you think Beta will play much of a role?
Probably during like international windows.
Yeah.
And he probably, like, if you talk MLS legends, like that guy's up there as well.
Yeah.
Like, played at a ton of clubs. Really solid guy. But Keegan Rosenberry, I think, is probably the locked-in starter there, and then Bynes on the other side. And then might as well round out the defense. Abubakar in the middle, who's, I think I've seen someone posted on Twitter, is like, we show those SoRare data graphs of like, look at these scores. Can you believe this is only 0.1?
Yeah.
He was one of those guys. And then next to him, Austin Trusty, most likely. Could be Wilson or Moore, but I think Trusty has the inside edge there. And then, I wish their keeper had a guard row, because I think that would be one I'd like to back.
Yeah, well, he's definitely due a card, and there's a few teams like this that we'll be covering in the series that their number one keeper isn't actually got a card for some odd reason. Yarborough, I think, will be one of these ones that when his card does come out, there'll probably be a lot of traction towards it, because anyone who wanted it last year will not have it. So you've almost got this kind of double demand on some of these cards that didn't get a 2020 version for whatever reason, for competitive gain or for collection gain. So some of those cards you might find will be extra competitive at auction. But overall, like for the Rapids, like in the conference, I'm expecting them to become playoff. Just because of the form they've got from last year. They've got a good kind of bed of a squad. We're talking about transfers there. There's not a great deal of incomings and outgoings. It's a fairly stable ship. It's just about getting more matches completed and hopefully continue that point ratio that he's been grabbing.
Yep. It's a ship. In the past, it was a sinking ship. But I think now the ship's at least floating and headed in the right direction. There might be some wind in the sails, so things are looking good. Like, I'm, dare I say this, cautiously optimistic for this year. Like, I'll never get that.
Let me ask you this. This is always one thing I've taken in my previous kind of exposure to MLS, where I maybe do some match play betting on like betting websites or whatever. I would always think of Colorado at home as a game at altitude. Am I right in saying that? Yeah.
Yep. It's I have it in feet. It's basically 1,500 meters high.
Wow.
So it's Mile High City, right? So 1 mile is 5,280 feet. That's the altitude of Denver. So whatever 1 mile is in meters.
Yeah, that's cool.
1.5 kilometers. So
yeah, because MLS is one of these divisions where home field advantage for some clubs is a distinctive, undeniable force of nature. Colorado for me is one of those clubs, and I always put it down to altitude, but I wasn't sure if I was just thinking Rocky Mountains, stadiums up the top of a hill, if I was imagining that, or if it was actually founded by actual reality, so that's good too.
No, it's true. Like in the NFL for football, like the oval football, it's kicking for, how they hit field goals from like 60, 70 yards out, like because the air is so thin, most of the NFL records are actually in Denver.
Oh, wow.
If they have good conditions, it makes I think they've run studies on hockey and basketball that like that altitude difference, it does come into effect, especially early season.
Yeah.
And you're still getting into shape.
Magic. Is there anything else you'd want to add in for Colorado? Because it is your the team you support, Richard? Is there anything else I've kind of missed that you'd want to add in?
No, please don't disappoint me. But I'm also here to be disappointed, so that's what we're here for. You
Don't
know?
let us down. Don't let us down.
Yep. I think they opened the season at Dallas, so but then week 2 they're hosting Austin, the new boys. So
Yeah.
I think if come out 3 points, a little bit more than 3 points out of those 2 games.
Do you know, looking at your opening fixtures, I can see you getting a lot of points really quickly. Dallas are okay, right? I'm not one of these guys that pure loves Dallas. I think they're decent, but they're not like anything to be worried about or scared of in particular. Austin, I was kind of saying to you off camera. I think like I followed a lot of expansion teams over the last couple of years, and expansion teams, it's very rare they hit the ground running. Doesn't matter how good their roster is, doesn't matter how well prepared they are. You only need to look at Miami from last year. Nashville did okay, but Miami, and Austin are not a USL team, are they? They are just a brand new top to bottom club, aren't they?
I think so because they had Austin Bold still.
Yeah. So when you get these guys coming in, like New York in the past, Miami last year, these guys that are starting out fresh, they've got no USL background or whatever. Yeah. They do take a month or two to even get to know each other's names and figure out what the hell they're doing. So I can see between that, Whitecaps I'm not a big fan of. Minnesota did well last year. Dynamo are again one of these teams I just do not like.
Yep.
So that first 5 fixtures, I could feasibly see you getting 9 to 12 points. Yeah. Quite comfortably, and if you're getting 9 to 12 points in the first 5 games, that's a big propellant for the rest of the season. You then get tough games, with LAFC. You get Dallas again quite quickly, but yeah, it's good opening fixtures, and again, a lot of SO5 managers will be looking at the first bunch of fixtures for themselves to get some rewards, to gain some confidence, and a wee bit of confirmation bias that I have picked some good players. So if that's your way, if you're so inclined, the first couple of fixtures are definitely worth taking note of. Like we've seen with the last club where we're looking at DC, a lot of clubs in MLS, and you'll know this as well as I do, Richard, they go through chunks of playing at home and playing away. And if you can notice any little correlations with clubs where they're maybe going to difficult away fixtures on the road, like Colorado and these other ones, then that can be things to avoid. Maybe wait for the price to dip down because a team's going to get battered for a few weeks. And equally, if you can see somebody like Colorado, they've got a good chance of getting 9 to 12 points out of the first 15. You can guarantee some of those prices will jump up quite quickly when some of those guys are hitting 80s and 90s, getting goals, getting assists, that kind of thing. So I'd expect a good start to the season for Colorado for sure.
I'm actually pretty excited about Bassett now. I bought him kind of without taking that into account, but
well,
because if you go like
on you go.
The prices are the prices are so tied to the SO5 scores, right? Like the last 5 scores matter so much. So if we're sitting then 5 weeks into the season after that, I think the Houston game, and Bassett put up what average in the last 5 is 80 points. Okay, that's optimistic, but then you sell him for that's prime opportunity.
When I seen the Michael Edwards signing from Wolfsburg, you probably remember this, but the main link.
Where does he play?
I think he's a midfielder.
Okay.
But see, the main link for Cole Bassett moving away was also Wolfsburg. So when I see a transaction like that, it makes me think there is dialogue going on. There's a relationship getting built. No smoke without fire kind of situation. Wolfsburg are linked to buy one of their players, and then all of a sudden Colorado buy one of their players. I don't think that's a big coincidence. Could be a really big year for Cole Bassett. I think anyone who pays any attention to MLS will tell you that as well.
Him and Vines are, I think, next to go.
Who? Sam Vines?
Sam Vines, yep.
Yeah, he's got a big reputation. I'm not gonna lie. Last season, all I've seen of Rapids was highlights and stuff. I don't think I actually caught a Rapids match. And it wasn't through that disdain that I described at the beginning of the segment. It was just through logistics. I don't think they were ever playing a team I was following on SoRare, or it was at a time that was convenient for me or whatever. So I'm looking forward to catching some Cole Bassett this year. The next team we're coming to, Surface, is actually, air quotes, my hometown club, if you like. I've got family, I live in Washington State. I've followed the Sounders kinda most of my life. Seattle this year, I was saying to you before we were recording, I'm not actually... I don't think Seattle should be sleeping that well at night at this point. I don't think they seem that as well set up for the season ahead as they have in seasons gone by. What's your kind of take on them?
I agree. I mean, they have, insane backbone of some of the best players, but they're all a little bit older. They didn't make super impressive moves in the offseason. They kind of just held their ground. And I mean, yeah, they looked pretty flat in the final game. They were last year. They were tired. How many games are you able to watch live over there? It's gotta be middle of the night, right?
Yeah, well, I think see most like match days, Sky will probably have one or two matches on at the most. Sometimes
Okay.
three because the time that the New York game kicks off is like 11 o'clock at night, so they can easily put that on one of their channels that doesn't get many views anyway. And 11 o'clock at night, there's not much competition, so it just depends. Sometimes they'll have one, sometimes they'll have none, sometimes they'll have three. Kind of really depends on as well if golf is on and some of these other sports, cricket, things that run at all hours of the day, you know.
Yeah.
So it kind of depends. But with Seattle, I didn't. Did I watch Seattle last year? I don't actually think I did, to be honest with you. But Seattle can be harder to watch because the West Coast time difference conflicts a bit easier with like European time slots.
Yeah.
It's normally the East Coast games you can catch. Guys like Atlanta, New York, they tend to get a bit more airtime over here.
Yeah. Plus, it's just the middle of the night. I mean, they're on in the evening here, so I mean, it must be 4 o'clock in the morning or something, right?
Yeah, well, it is late.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just no competition. I think at that time. But I'm looking at your depth chart. I'm going to pull it on. Oh, sorry. I'll pull the depth chart on for 2 seconds, right? Because I was just having a wee look at this. When you look at the players they're packing, right? When you think about what done them well last year, right? There's no Jordan Morris. When you look at the wings, Christian Roldan on the right is fine. Rowe on the left is fine. But beyond that, they do look quite light. Roldan at right back, the brother, and then the left back, Nohu, looks to be number one choice over there. They don't actually have a lot of depth in those positions where a lot of their chances come from. They come from a lot of wide creation. That's the way that team's kind of been built over the last couple of years. So
I feel like. Oh, go ahead.
No, on you go.
So yeah, I mean, I feel like the key will be Christian Rodon, because I watched almost every single game last year for Seattle, and he is so polarizing because he's super impressive at times, and he just completely falls asleep and is out of games for long periods. I mean, he scored relatively well for SoRare, but there just be these long stretches of the game where he was completely uninvolved, and it was so frustrating because he's so talented. And I kind of actually had the same sense about Paolo too. I don't know if they just get into like Lodero and Morris and Rudi's watching mode or what exactly is going on. Yeah. But there's just these times when they're dominating and then they just go silent for a while. So they added Rowe, and it'll be interesting to see how he fits in the left. He's kind of slotted there. And they added Freddie Montero, who's came back and
legend.
A legend, and who will probably be spelling Rudy as late in the game, or as as a sub, or as another striker up front if they need some more shots. But yeah, it's going to be interesting to see. I mean, losing Morris is huge. I don't think he'd be underestimated. I mean, he just unfortunately, we all know what happened. He came over to England, had this horrible injury. So it's very sad. But he was really integral to the team. So, and to be honest, Leardam in the back was actually pretty integral too. He was a real chance creator. He had quite a few chances created, quite a few shots. So, like, for example, last year, Morris and Leardam had 56 of their 277 shots. So those are gone.
Oh, wow. So
the question is besides Rowe, who else is going to take, going to up their shots? Who else is going to take more? And it could be Dellum, it could be Leva if he starts to get some more playing time. He's a young prospect who's pretty interesting. But to me, is Lodero Rudiz are they going to shoot more often now without Morris in the mix? It's going to be interesting to see where those shots come from. They were pretty efficient in their shots, right? So I mean, they were tied for fourth with most goals scored, but they were in the bottom tier as far as shots taken. But their defense was solid, and it's a shame Gomez doesn't have a card. I think he could be one of the top 10 defensive players in the game. It's real. I hope he gets a card this year because it'd just be fun to have him. Who was also an interesting player for them. But he has an interesting body style, kind of interesting play style. He comes up a lot too on the left, and at times he was looking amazing, and then other times he had quite bad SoRare games. He was kind of up and down. I won his super rare early in the year, so I was scouting him. I ended up using it a lot. I mean, he still was their best scoring defensive player, I believe. But again, it's because they don't have all their cards. So, Fry actually is obviously one of the best goalkeepers to have, especially since they're in the bottom of goals allowed. But going into the season, it seemed like their team's somewhat set, actually. I think that there was some maybe thought amongst the SoRare community about who was going to play up at the top. Was there potentially not going to be Rudias, at some point? But I don't think there's any question about that. So just based on like how Bruin was selling high for a hot minute there. So and he may play some, we'll see. But yeah.
Well,
so looking at this, go ahead.
I was going to say, with Will Bruin, in terms of what we're both kind of asking is like, where does the extra goal contributions come from? I think there's a wee bit of that is going to be shouldered by Bruin. I'm very much like you, like looking through the team. I don't really get my imagination captured and see them winning the conference or them really pulling up much trees. I think it will be a case of Lodero and Rui Diaz, they turn up for 15 games, win 15 games, maybe scored 15 goals each, with a couple of assists in their direction. And in the other games when they're away in internationals, maybe they're injured and suspended at different periods also, they're going to be in the mire with every other team just slogging out, trying to not concede more than the other team really, or just trying to keep it down to 0-0s and 1-0s, that kind of thing. And Sebastian Frey, I make you totally right. For me, he's one of the most attractive goalkeepers in the league. So reliable. No matter what we are saying, the now surface, it's almost inevitable that Seattle will still reach the playoffs and will still have a really good season, even though it's really hard to work out how that's actually going to happen.
Yeah, they're extremely solid. They're extremely well coached. I mean, Bruin only played 500. He looks like he played 560 minutes last year. So it doesn't seem like I think the coach's name is Schmelzer.
Yep.
Is super inclined to just go to him and give him a dominating role. We'll see, but yeah, I don't know where the shots are going to come from. That's the big question. But I'm thinking there's still going to be a top 5 team in the West. I would be surprised if they were out of the top 5. Maybe not top 3 or not second like they were last year, but I still see them as a pretty strong team.
Yeah.
Looking at their schedule a bit, I mean, obviously, you have the questions about international duty for Rudy and Arriaga too, who's pretty integral to the defense as well. They have a really hard stretch in August. Their hardest stretch of the year is in August. If you're schedule watching, I mean, they play Dallas, Portland, Dallas, Columbus, Portland.
Wow.
And to me, that's just a pretty brutal August.
Yeah.
So I know some people who are really strategic are kind of looking at those types of things as far as how they line up. But what it comes down to is this team is all about midfielders. I mean, they just have the best midfielders in the game. I mean, I think they have the strongest group of midfielders. If I was going to take a copy of any one team's midfielders, I would take Seattle, pretty much hands down, right? I mean, you have 3.
Paolo, Roldan, Lodero, they're 3 monsters,
yeah.
aren't they?
Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, it's they're strong. And then we'll see about any of the new player, any new cards this year. See how it goes. I saw the last Lodero Super Rare closed yesterday, the day before. Was it? It was 3.7.
Is that what it went
for?
I seen it come on.
Yeah.
I keep a wee eye on it in case you guys are all sleeping on them, But but I didn't actually check. But 3.7. Wow, that's interesting.
Yeah. I mean, that's insane.
Yeah, the games he does play, it's hard to see him not hitting 60, 70 plus most of those times, so solid card to pick up. I actually think a little sneaky one in this team, and it'll probably be the last thing I say about Seattle, is, the legend returning Freddie Montero. Like, I think, I was actually having a chat with somebody privately, saying like, oh, by the way, because they were talking about buying him on Twitter, and I just sort of shot my wee message in private. I was like, listen, I don't know if you should really be counting your chickens on Montero. This is when he was still at Vancouver. And I was like, the guy's kind of done, all the rest of it. But a situation like this, where a player who's definitely past their best, should have probably retired by now because of injury and whatever, when they go back down to that, like, it's not his hometown club, but he's got solid roots there by all accounts, and he is a club legend, you can get reinvigorated and you can get an extra mile or two out of some of these guys. And even though I don't expect him on any one occasion to play more than like 20, 30 minutes max, he can be impactful. He can come on, get an assist, get a goal.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing about MLS, and it's still interesting to see how when more teams outside of MLS are added to Champion America, how the region evolves. But, like we said earlier, forward is a tough position. So if you're somebody you're not going to be able to afford, one of the top guys, and you want a long shot team, if you could put together 2 solid mids or 2 solid Ds and a goalie, you just want a forward who's going to get substituted in and potentially have a chance. I mean, can he be the Bradley Wright Phillips of 2021? That's the question. And if so, like, that guy was extremely valuable. There were lots of teams that won cards with him in the mix last year. Yeah. So, but if you look at the AA score, the game scores, not the decisive scores of the forwards in MLS, I mean, they're low. Yeah. They're just lower on average, which is why you have lower forward scores on average. But it's pretty amazing just to real quick touch on Lodero's season last year. I mean, like, it was unbelievable how much better he was than just everybody else as far as at the mid goes. And, he just lots of decisives, pretty strong game score, just really, really good play. So, yeah, I think a lot of people are counting on him. And to me, I think he's got to be one of the top 3 or 4 key MLS players for the season, just as far as how many are out there, who's using him, where they're using him, etc. We'll see. If he has a bad year, gets injured, it'll be interesting to see, how the region's affected, because everyone's gonna have to go to Plan B.
I think that'll be lights out Seattle at that point.
Yeah, he's the heart and soul of the team for sure.
Also joining us as well, we've got the one, the only Captain Canada himself, the man Jhod. Jhod, or Jeremy, as I'm going to call you. Thanks a lot for joining me, mate. It means a lot.
Yeah, thank you for having me. This is exciting stuff.
No, pleasure is mine. I'm looking forward to getting stuck into this. The first team me and you are going to be covering is going to be the newest club to MLS, which is Austin FC, the newest expansion team. It took me a wee while to actually find a website that had their full kind of current squad roster up to date. So we found it here, and as I was kind of preparing, like, kind of looking for Austin players for this season, kind of coming up, anyone I might be interested in or whatever, and you kind of look through their transfers. With these expansion teams, I've kind of got a lot of experience of watching some of these guys come on, as I'm sure you have as well, Jeremy. But the first thing that they always do try and clamber for is that kind of MLS actual league experience. And the first name that kind of jumps to me when I look with that in mind at the Austin squad is Matt Besler in defence. Obviously he's 34, he's a bit of a veteran. But Matt Besler comes in as probably their key defender, along with, I don't know, you can maybe say Ben Sweat. Ben Sweat was part of the New York City team when they first expanded and they first came in, so he's got a wee bit of been down that road before experience in the kind of dressing room. But they're the two, certainly in defence, that kind of jump out to me. When you're kind of looking at Austin, Jeremy, what's the kind of thing that kind of jumps out to you for their first season ahead?
Yeah, I guess when I'm looking at their team, they actually do have some potential. I agree. On defense, I think Besler, Sweat, Lima would probably be guys who I'd pencil in as likely starters. I know Sweat didn't do much. I think he was at Inter Miami before. He hadn't really, he was briefly there, didn't do much. Besler and Lima are a good long-term MLS quality defenseman. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. And definitely in the midfield, I'd say Alex Ring is the guy who I'd look for to probably be kind of running the show, at least until we find out this Thomas Pochettino, their designated player.
Yep.
I would not be the least bit surprised if you have those guys kind of running the midfield on the team.
In terms of midfield, the only player, Alex Ring, will be very familiar to a lot of SoRare managers because it was such a powerhouse last year at NYC and SO5. But for me, I'm a wee bit biased. The only midfielder I'm actually really going to be paying attention to for Austin is Seb Berhalter, because I've got one of him. And he's went there on loan. I would hope that means he might get around 10 starts this year. That's something I'm hopeful on. If he gets any more, even better. But I think you're quite right. Alex Ring has been signed as the main midfielder, the guy that's going to go box to box. I suspect he's going to be the captain. I think he is, because he wore the armband enough times last year in New York. And the Pochettino one, is somebody I'm not familiar with. We were kind of chatting about this before coming on. But the DPs that come in are always in on big money. They're always well scouted these days. Maybe not in the past, but certainly more as time has went on and things have developed in the world of football. And these are the guys for an expansion team that can really make or break their season, in terms of the success that they have. If you think back to Atlanta, when they expanded in, all their DPs hit big time. Almiron, Martinez, these types of guys that they brought through, Guzan. So Pochettino is definitely one of these guys we'll be looking for with the 2021 cards to see how effective he actually is in SO5. With Alex Ring, do you think do you think I'm quite right in saying that he'll probably be the captain? He's almost certainly going to be the main guy in midfield, isn't he?
Yeah, I guess the biggest risk with Ring is the fact that, like, I think he'll be running the show, but I don't know the potential of this Thomas Pochettino, right? Like, because depending on who they kind of start using, I wouldn't be the least bit surprised, since the team does seem like they're focusing on veterans and balance and getting players, established players into the squad. The tough thing is, in terms of like SO5 and SoRare, is I don't think Pochettino's not going to have any cards. Dominguez, a left winger who I have no real knowledge of, I don't think he has any cards. Tarbell, the goalie, doesn't have any card, right? So the issue is I don't know what you're going to get on, as a forward or a goalkeeper, which are the two hard ones to fill in to your lineup.
Yeah.
I'm assuming with new cards, Pochettino would be a good pickup. Ring is already priced pretty high in the market, right? So that's the issue with him. And then I don't think you can go wrong with Lima, Bessler, Sweat, those kind of they should be putting in, a shift. But I mean, it looks pretty balanced at the outset, but it's always a risk with these expansion sides, right? Because like you said, either they turn out to be Atlanta or they turn out to be like FC Cincinnati and
Minnesota.
Show a few moments of brilliance, but a lot of pretty lackluster play, right?
Yeah. I'm just looking at Ring's scores at the moment. So last season at NY, he played every game virtually. He didn't really get many reds. I actually seen some guys on Twitter talking about how hard it is to get Ring on auction. He just doesn't actually come into cycles very often. So he's got a wee bit of scarcity about him now, on top of just the actual limitation on the numbers of cards at the moment, which is an odd one. Diego Fagundes is the guy that's got a card. Now Fagundes is one of these ones that is kind of threatened to be good, I think, for feels like 10 years or something like that. It's just not really happened for him. He gets a clean chance coming into this team with the kind of guys, if he's got guys like Ring around him, this Pochettino, it might be the perfect kind of melting pot for somebody like Fagundes to come out. And last time I checked, Fagundes was actually a really cheap card because he just did not play last year. But this guy has been around the league for, I think, his whole career, I think I'm right in saying. So he does have a bit of experience in that respect, but he's a guy that you could maybe pick up as a wee sneaky, because they've not got a deep roster. They've went with experience and balance, as you were kind of saying, Jeremy. This is the guy surely they've brought in to play, I don't know, let's say 15 plus games. You would imagine?
Yeah, no, I totally agree with so Fagundes is one of those guys who, I know when he was at New England, say 5 years ago, had a couple really good seasons and then totally kind of fell off the map, right? So he's one of those guys, you're right, if you buy him cheap, you're just kind of hoping that he does something, because when you look at the squad, I don't know who the main scorer will really be. They have a lot of just pretty average strikers on that.
Yeah.
And that, one of them could catch fire. It's just who that will be is an unknown. And actually, truthfully, with an expansion team, maybe no one does, right? Maybe it's just a bunch of hodgepodge goals from Ring chips in a few, Pochettino chips in a few. And does that really do you much for SO5? That's the tricky call, right?
Yeah.
So I guess I would just say, with any kind of expansion team, you'd hope that you could maybe get some bargains when new cards come on the marketplace, right? Especially if they have new ones that come out. And I really think for this season, COVID's going to be a big issue, because the United States has not done a good job of handling it. And I know the vaccine is rolling out, but I could definitely see there being postponed games, because that's definitely happened in NHL, NBA, etc. I don't see how that doesn't continue into the summer.
And Austin being in Texas, I'm pretty sure quite famously the Texan governor or whatever came out and said oh, we're open for business, everything's back to normal now. So yeah, it's definitely the current kind of COVID climate, I feel like, is definitely something to be mindful of. Is a good suggestion.
Yeah, I'm in hockey pools, baseball, NFL football pools, and oh my goodness, the Southern teams they destroy you in fantasy, because surprise, in MLS, Dallas had issues.
Yep.
Not surprised, given their governor. I know in hockey, Tampa Bay had issues, especially coming out of Florida. Nashville had issues, both Predators and the like in hockey and also the Nashville like soccer team. So I don't know. Perhaps they all get vaccinated, but I wouldn't put money on that. I could see it. I could see that there being postponements galore, and then if there's postponements galore, then who knows what the roster shakes out like, right? Like, are they doing rotation? It might actually mean that some of these reserve keepers, like or the backup keepers, actually get some playing time, right? So
Yeah.
that's the biggest thing about this year that I don't think you can. Yeah, nothing's going to be a lock. That's all I'll say with MLS.
I think one of the keepers they've got, Struver, I think he's got a card. I don't know if I've just imagined that, so I'm checking him out. But I'm pretty sure he's got a card. I might have imagined that. No, he does. He's got a card. Oh, no, he doesn't.
Yeah.
No, he does. Brad Struver, he was like third choice, it looks like, in New York last year.
Yeah.
But yeah, he's got a few cards. I can't actually I've lost my marbles. I forgot to check this on SoRare data, how many cards there is, but there's not many. If you've got one, you might get lucky. In terms of, yeah, I don't actually know how many there is. It's hard to see. 5. There's probably about 20 or so, give or take. But yeah, I'm not holding my breath on Austin, but one of the things I've noticed, or I think that I've noticed anyway over the last couple of expansion teams, is they seem to, I thought I had this opinion anyway until Miami showed up, right? But I had this kind of impression that more expansion teams were becoming better organised, learning from previous franchise startup mistakes, you know. So I'm kind of holding a wee bit of faith that Austin don't do quite what Miami did or Cincinnati, and maybe try and have that kind of middle ground, like maybe like New York had, or even Orlando. Orlando, you know, even though they started with Kaká in the team, they didn't really have much else, and they've always been kind of okay since they came around, you know.
Yeah, no, I'd agree. Austin, they're making the right moves. Like, if I was to design a team, it actually reminds me, in hockey, the Vegas Golden Knights were kind of a new team that came out and just took a bunch of like lunchbox kind of players and ended up like making the Stanley Cup like finals pretty much.
Wow.
So, I mean, you can do that, especially if you're getting people, you know, like, especially if you're getting veterans at a good rate. If you're managing the salary cap, which is extremely convoluted in MLS, like the you need like a post-grad degree to understand how the heck the allocation money and
Yeah.
you know, like. And now I will say this: the issue in North America is that you know, promotion and relegation will never happen. I love how there's people who like think like, oh, well, it works in Europe. Yes, people in North America, it's all about the money, and no one will go down a tier, right? MLS honestly is already viewed as second rate compared to the NBA, NHL, MLB, NFL, even CFL in Canada here. And what I would say is, like, I think that kind of dismisses some of the quality in the league. But it's also somewhat fair because with the salary cap, some of the players just can't be given that much money, right? Like, you have some guys on 50 grand a year. We're not talking about like a week. We're talking about like some of these guys are on like 50 grand US a year. You know, guys in training making 25K a year, like pretty much probably staying at like their grandma's house and then training down the road. Like, yeah, like you, unless you're a designated player and you're say like a Josie Altidore or, you know, Pozuelo on TFC, like they make boatloads. But a lot of these players, you just kind of hope that, you know, like they're fine making their $200,000 a year, $250,000 a year, kind of like veteran, solid salary, making go of it. So that's what makes it really tricky because you need to have balance. Pretty, I don't want to diminish them because they're still decent players, but I mean, it's very odd when a player making 50 grand a year is up against a player making $5 million a year. So that's the issue that MLS runs into.
No, totally.
Yeah.
But no, it's a very good point you make, and they kind of, you know, one thing I've kind of noticed with MLS, and it's probably the last thing we'll kind of talk about in terms of Austin, but a lot of players do seem quite accepting of the fact that I am a GAM player, I am a TAM player, you know, like clubs will trade me around. I might only play 3 times a season, you know, but that's just part of my contract, and that's how I make a living, you know. So I think maybe in Europe especially you'll get a bit more resistance to that, where they'll maybe try and push the boat, maybe move down a league to try and improve themselves or whatever. But you do get a lot of guys like Ben Sweat, for example. You know, I know he played for New York. I didn't even know he was in Miami. That guy like that, he's went to 2 or 3 expansion clubs. You know, he's obviously not the top 3 kind of guy in the league, but a guy like that has a lot of use and a lot of value because of the way the cap and everything, the way everything's built. He can come into an Austin like this at 29 years of age, and he can be a veteran player and help guide them in their first season or two, because he's kind of walked down that path, which is an interesting dynamic, because in Europe and a lot of when you drill into the actual specific countries, you won't get a lot of domestic movement really between a lot of clubs in particularly different countries, whereas all across MLS you could theoretically see some of these non-top tier players. They could really play for anyone if the situation was to arise, which is quite unique also.
Yeah, that's what I would say. The one thing in North American sports is that like parity is definitely true, right? Like the difference between a top team and a bottom team is not that much. It's not like the difference in like I'll be honest with you. You know that Bayern Munich's going to win every year. Juventus is going to win, right? It's like it's between Celtic and Rangers and like Scotland. It's probably between the top 6, right? Like, surprise, surprise. It's what? Maybe one year Man City, next year Liverpool. Maybe Man United comes in. Like, it's not hard to pick winners in Europe, to be honest with you.
Yep.
In North America,
could be.
I mean, you could have like, I don't think anyone thought that Atlanta was going to be any good, and then they pick up like Almiron, Joseph Martinez, and like pretty much fill up that entire Atlanta like NFL stadium full with like fans, and became like the biggest hit in town. So that's what can happen in North America, and I think people will go to even smaller markets being like, you know what, if your family is fine just like chilling out in Miami and you're fine making your $250K being on the beach, like I don't know,
cool. Yeah,
better than getting people shooting fireworks and throwing flares at you in the rest of the world, right? It's kind of for some of these players, they must be like, oh, it's kind of nice not being like hounded by the paparazzi, right? People are pretty much like, you play for the who? They don't even know they're like some of the people in town don't even know that like Toronto sees it in a soccer team here. So, I mean, that's kind of the anonymity you can get in North America.
Now, I remember when Minnesota first came out as an expansion club, and they just could not beat anyone for love nor money. They were absolutely useless. They didn't really seem to have much of an idea of what they were looking to achieve on the pitch. They didn't, nothing just really clicked for them. DPs didn't pan out and all the rest of it. But over time, they're starting to turn things around. Last season, I think they did pretty well. I was actually really surprised when they came on to SoRare. I thought, I'm not even going to buy any of these cards. I know Minnesota are rubbish, but they've got some good guys knocking about their ranks, and they've definitely surprised a lot of people from last season. From an SO5 perspective, there's a few different cards you might want to consider. Some of them have cards, some of them don't. Again, we come to the goalkeeper situation. It's got to be Day St. Clair's number 1, and again, he doesn't have a card yet, Andrew.
It certainly seems that way. They have Tyler Miller as well, who was with LAFC, I believe, previously. But St. Clair seems like he's going to be the starter. Miller, at least, it's the first week of April. Miller has been trading enough that people think there's like the most you would pay for a guy that you don't know has the job. And I think that's kind of where it is. But I think probably nobody would be buying if we had St. Clair cards. And then Fred Emmings is their 4th or 5th or however long down the line. He has a card. He's either 16 or 17, and I think that's the only reason people are willing to kind of give him a shout. But he's a long way away from starting, both either for Minnesota or anybody else. But yeah, St. Clair is probably going to be the guy, and Miller, I think, is being bought as if he has and it's almost like people think he has a 48% chance to make it, and it's probably 18% at best. So yeah.
Yeah, totally. And it's one of these things. A lot of people will pay a lot of money for a backup goalkeeper, knowing that they're maybe going to get 5 starts or whatever. But it is important to remember there's competitions that these guys could play in that are not SO5 scored. So when you are checking out those appearance stats and all the rest of it, check them across all competitions and just double check. Oh yeah, that is MLS. It's not Open Cup. It's MLS Cup. There is differences between these things. When it comes to at the back defensively, for Minnesota, they've went and signed Aiko Para, a big DP, somebody who's going to come into the club, who's a top caliber centre back in the league, and really try and lead them on defensively. He didn't play at all last year, and I know that was a massive problem for them. They've not really strengthened, as far as I can tell, in defence, which is something to note, of course. Right. But from a SoRare perspective, big commanding centre backs like that are the sort of card you're looking to pick up. And with the form that Minnesota had last year, to have a star centre back in a team that can perform in that way and go as deep in the competition as they did would normally be very attractive. But Opara's been nowhere to be seen, and there's not many other defenders we can pick from.
Yeah, so I guess he took last season off. He decided to opt out because of the COVID restriction or all of the COVID stuff. The difficulty is that it's recently come out. It was a lot of kind of unknown of why he was not coming back. And they've kind of intimated recently that he's suffered a number of concussions throughout his career and that another one may be enough to have him not play anymore, which for somebody who plays like him, I mean, he's a big center back, so he's always going to be going up for headers, whether trying to score or trying to stop somebody from scoring. So I think he hasn't started training yet, and if he does play this season, it's going to be delayed because he hasn't really been training yet. We have Bakayi Debasi, who played instead of Opara last year, who has put up some really good scores and has no card on SoRare yet. So maybe we do get it. But he'll probably be lining up next to Michael Boxall, who is one of the most consistent center backs in Major League Soccer, and is one of those guys who has a very good kind of floor baseline scores every week that is very helpful for those who play the ETH threshold, but he also can sort of get on a set piece and have some upside. So I think he's one of those guys who's like very overlooked. And if it's possible that we don't have either of their two center backs, the other ones, Opara or Debasi, then Boxall could be a nice find for some people.
Now, this is a new one on me. I cannot lie, Andrew. This guy's got really good scores. Traded really cheap now, considering.
Yeah, he should not be that cheap. I'll put it that way. Or everybody else is too expensive, and that's the actual answer.
Quite possibly. I'm looking at his graph, and there's 1, 2, 5 reds. It's all greens. Not really many oranges, it must be said, which is quite odd in itself.
I was gonna say he's got more greens than anything else.
Yeah, that is an amazing find. But it's either right down here or right up there normally with some people. But that is just incredible. I don't think I've seen many graphs like it. His last 40 averages, 15. They all add up. It's so bizarre why his price is so low. Normally these things get snapped up on the market. That is very impressive. And guys like this, go so underrated in the market, just because they're not a big brand name, they're not a big DP or whatever. It's a guy called Michael Boxall,
Yeah.
But there's guys all over the platform that are like this. That they're not under 23, they're not a big name, they're not an up and coming high prospect, and they just go right under the radar. But when you actually look at these stats and you see the actual price on the market, it's an absolute bargain. And there's accounts all over the place that normally will dig these things up, put them on Twitter, and boom, they're gone. And not the case with this guy. He's went right under the radar, I think.
I think one of the things I learned early with SoRare is that if you want to play for right now, you need to get points, and age is obviously an issue because if you don't have cards in 5 years, but like if you want the points now, like we see Jose Font is one of the best defenders in Europe. He's 37, 36, 37, whatever it is, and people are saying I don't want that, but you're losing out on all of these points. I mean, you can take the points now and win a card of some guy who's 18 or 19. So do that. And I think Boxall's a spring chicken next to Font, and you might as well just take those points and see if you can win a younger card with those.
It's 100% a strategy people should be running with, and I'll admit it is hard to not be biased against some of those guys. But that swiftly takes us on to the midfield for Minnesota. Now, there's not a big deal in numbers here, but there's a lot of quality in this midfield, it must be said. Some of these guys, when you actually drill in and look at their graphs, guys like Robin Lod, Jan Gregus, Reynoso, they're just covered in SO5 glory. Jan Gregus actually came to my attention as well as a lot of Scottish people, I think it must have been about 5-6 months ago, when Slovakia, I think that's the country he's with, played us. He actually played really, really well. He had a card on SoRare at the time, and me and a few other guys, I didn't actually buy him unfortunately, but a bunch of other guys I know went up and picked him up nice and cheap before all this spring. But when you look at the graph, it is mind-blowing. There is no reds anywhere to be seen. Account 4 DNPs, and other than that, it's all green.
It's really impressive to see. I'll say that if you go towards the beginning, the the higher scores are higher. Like, he was getting some 80s and he even has 100 there. That was back when he was taking set pieces, and he probably doesn't have that now. Or if he does, it'll be a share. And so, not to say that the green scores evaporated, but the higher ones were back when he was taking set pieces. And so it's important to note that he most likely won't have them at least this upcoming season for a guy who we can't actually buy his card yet for.
Yeah, no, I'm with you, and I look forward to trying getting one. It won't be cheap, I'm sure. The man you're referring to there. The thing with Gregus and set pieces is, yeah, they're not essential, but they definitely do help. But the man, as you just alluded to there, Emmanuel Reynoso, he's got a funny kind of nickname, first name, I always forget it, and I can't even pronounce it anyway. It's saying Emmanuel here, but there's another wee silly front name that he goes with. It's like a nickname type thing.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's Emmanuel. This is his graph here. So a wee bit more red than what we had with Grey Goose. There's still tons of greens. Lots of match winning contributions from this guy. Since he's come in, he's hit the ground running. He's their key playmaker. He's the headline grabber. He's, everything's, what Ladero and Pozuelo are in the league, this guy is also to Minnesota. He's been so effective in there. It looks like they're starting to build a bit of a team around him as well. And guys like this, when their card comes out, it's just going to absolutely fly. It's never going to go cheap. But we live in hope that we can maybe get one. You never know. We might get lucky.
Yeah, I think he's the one who took over the set pieces basically from Grey Goose, and I think we see more green on the right side of the chart than the left, which is always good because that means he's trending in the right direction. I think he's going to be very expensive right off the bat whenever the cards come, just because. He's fairly young. He's in his mid-20s, likely to have a pretty big role in their attack. And they have two other guys in their attack that are longtime MLS players who we look right over, Ethan Finley and Juan Agudelo. Agudelo is one of those guys, I think he's 28, but it also feels like he's been in MLS for 28 years and has had like one or two good seasons, but not, he doesn't really move the needle like Reynoso and Grey Goose kind of do. And Finley's kind of the same way. Finley's one of those guys that, is on the wing and will send in as many crosses as possible. And, when they hit, that's good. And when he has 16 possessions lost, that's bad. And so usually you don't want to pay up for guys like that.
Yeah, I completely agree. I'm just having a wee look at Ethan Finley here now. But I remember Agudelo, you're right, he's one of these guys who's been around for ages. I think he came through like New York or something in 17. He was one of these guys who's going to be the future of MLS, he's going to be the future of American football and whatever. And it's not really panned out. I actually think he did kind of okay when he was at Miami last year, but yeah, he's just a guy, as you say, he's not really moved the needle, he's not really kicked on, he's not really made a name for himself, if he's a Red Bull product, then that's not too big of a problem. But Ethan Finley here, yeah, is not, it's a name I kind of see floated about, it's not someone I know terribly well, but, like getting crosses into the box, there's a budget and there's a place for that, and some guys, they're never going to exceed their kind of ceiling, if you like, but they can be useful to managers at different price points throughout the league, and we always like to see that these guys do contribute to football matches. It's a team game, and the more that they can contribute in any kind of fashion to an SO5 angle, all the better, I think. And yeah, I can see that from his graph, mainly red, so a lot of appearances from the bench, and yeah, the odd green, you take a gamble on him, and he maybe comes off, gets the assist, gets a tap in of a goal, whatever it might be, then that could work for somebody. I don't think that's a big stretch of the imagination.
I was going to say, you'll definitely want Lod before you want Finley or Agudelo, though.
Oh, I completely agree. Robin Lod, again, is a name you can find quite easily on SoRare when you're looking through MLS because he's European, so again, you expect that European kind of pedigree of academy structure as a youth kid, bringing that over into MLS. If, good solid professionals can really make a good career for themselves in that respect, and they can be very effective SO5 cards, especially the sort of positions that Robin Lod was playing. And again, when you look at his graph, you can see the guy is an effective operator, and like you were saying earlier on, Andrew, it's that upward trajectory on the graph, so we can see that he's getting better and better, he's settling in, I think he maybe had to go away on international duty maybe once or something, he might have had a little COVID, he's got a DNP in there, self-isolation or whatever, but yeah, I really like this guy a lot. He's somebody who I recommend to a lot of new people whenever they kind of, previously they were asking me for cheap MLS cards and you could get such a thing. This is a guy I always put a lot of people in touch with.
Absolutely.
Because he can be useful at that end of the market totally. But Robin Lod, he's another great midfielder that goes alongside Reynoso and Grey Goose, and that is a midfield trio for SO5 could be very dangerous. Obviously, you can't really get them in together in an SO5 team, but they're three guys that are going to be very prolific throughout the season, and I think most people will be quite happy to hold their cards.
Yeah, no, I think that's definitely appropriate. He should play all the time as long as he's there. Like there's no questioning whether he's going to be in the lineup or not. Like he'll be there, and he'll be gone for Euros. But that's I mean, that's a sign that you got a good player, right?